The morning sun cast long shadows across the Nevada desert as Dr. Marcus Thorne's boots crunched against the brittle earth surrounding the Copper Ridge mine. 50 years of abandonment had transformed what was once a bustling operation into a graveyard of rusted machinery and weathered timber. The October air carried an unseasonable chill, and somewhere in the distance a hawk circled overhead, the only witness to what was about to unfold. Marcus adjusted his hard hat and checked his equipment one final time. As a geological surveyor for Pinnacle Industries, he'd explored dozens of abandoned mines across the American Southwest. But something about Copper Ridge felt different. Perhaps it was the stories the locals in nearby Dustfall told him over coffee that morning. Stories about 5 miners who vanished without a trace on November 15, 1962, during what should have been a routine shift. The official reports claimed cave-in. The families never believed it. "You sure about this, Doc?" called out Jimmy Restrepo, his field assistant, as he emerged from their truck with a coil of rope and emergency gear. At 26, Jimmy had the enthusiasm of youth, but lacked the seasoned instincts that came from years of underground exploration. Locals seemed pretty spooked when I mentioned we were heading up here. Marcus wiped sweat from his brow despite the cool air. Spooked or not, Pinnacle needs a full geological assessment before they can even consider reopening this site. Besides, what happened 50 years ago has nothing to do with our job today. But even as he spoke the words, Marcus felt a familiar unease settling in his stomach. In his 15 years of mine exploration, he'd learned to trust his instincts, and right now, every instinct was telling him to turn around and drive back to civilization. The entrance to Copper Ridge Mine yawned before them like a mouth frozen in an eternal scream. The original wooden support beams, incredibly, still stood testament to the craftsmanship of 1960s mining engineering. But time had not been kind. The metal rails that once carried ore carts to the surface had twisted into abstract sculptures of rust and decay, and somewhere deep within the mountain's belly, water dripped with the persistence of a forgotten metronome. According to the survey maps, Marcus said, unfolding a yellow document from his pack, the main shaft extends approximately 800 feet into the mountain, with 3 primary tunnels branching off at depths of 200, 400, and 600 feet respectively. Jimmy peered over his shoulder at the map. "What about here?" He pointed to a section marked with an X and labeled simply, "Sealed." "No, that's what we are here to investigate." Marcus refolded the map and secured it in his jacket pocket. The mining company sealed off a section of tunnel immediately after the incident. Pinnacle wants to know if it's structurally sound enough to reopen. What Marcus didn't mention was the note scrawled in the margin of the original survey report, written in faded ink by mine foreman Dale Hutchins. "God help us all if anyone ever opens that door again." The first 200 feet of descent passed without incident. Their headlamps cut through the perpetual darkness, revealing walls of solid granite interrupted by occasional veins of copper ore that caught the light like metallic blood vessels. The air grew cooler with each step, carrying with it the musty scent of decades-old timber and something else. Something Marcus couldn't quite identify, but that made his skin crawl. "Temperatures dropped 15 degrees since we entered," Jimmy observed, checking his instruments. "Humidity's up to 85%. Normal for this depth and region," Marcus replied, though privately he found the rapid temperature change unusual. "Keep monitoring. We will need detailed environmental readings for the report." At the 200-foot mark, they encountered the first branch tunnel. Marcus consulted his map and shone his light down the narrow passage. The beam penetrated perhaps 30 feet before being swallowed by absolute darkness. According to the survey, this tunnel had been fully excavated and was considered safe. But something about the perfect uniformity of the stone walls troubled him. "Doc, check this out." Jimmy was crouched beside one of the support beams, running his fingers along deep gouges in the wood. "These marks, they are not from mining equipment." Marcus joined him, examining the scarred timber. The gouges were indeed unusual, too deep and too irregular to be from pickaxes or drilling equipment. They looked almost like claw marks, though that was impossible. The marks were fresh enough that the wood beneath still showed pale against the weathered exterior. Probably from wildlife, Marcus said, though even as he spoke, he knew no animal could have made marks at this depth. Bears sometimes den in shallow cave systems. Jimmy didn't look convinced, but he said nothing as they continued their descent. The 400-foot level revealed more mysteries. Here, the mining company had installed electric lighting in 1961, a significant upgrade from the carbide lamps used in earlier operations. But every single bulb had been systematically shattered, leaving only the metal fixtures clinging to the walls like skeletal fingers. Broken glass crunched underfoot, and in the beam of Marcus's headlamp, the fragments glittered like stars in a malevolent constellation. Power must have been cut decades ago, Jimmy muttered, though his voice carried a nervous edge. Glass probably shattered from thermal shock when the system went cold. Marcus nodded, but his attention was focused on something else entirely. There, carved into the granite wall beside the electrical panel, were words etched in crude but deliberate letters. "They are still down there. V.K. Vernon Kellerman." Marcus recognized the name from the incident report, one of the 5 miners who had vanished on that November night 50 years ago. "Jimmy, look at this." But when Marcus turned, his assistant was 20 feet away, standing motionless in the center of the tunnel. The beam of Jimmy's headlamp pointed straight ahead, illuminating nothing but empty air. And for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the young man didn't respond. "Jimmy," Marcus called again, louder this time. Jimmy jerked as if awakening from a trance. "Sorry, Doc. Thought I heard something." "Heard what?" "Voices. Like people talking. Real quiet like. Coming from up ahead." Marcus strained his ears, but heard only the eternal drip of water and the whisper of air moving through stone passages. Probably just echo from our own voices. Sound behaves strangely underground. But even as he offered the rational explanation, Marcus felt the hairs on the back of his neck standing upright. The temperature had dropped another 10 degrees, and their breath was beginning to fog in the beam of their headlamps. More troubling still was the smell. That unidentifiable odor had grown stronger, taking on an almost organic quality that reminded him of roadkill left too long in the sun. At 600 feet, they found the sealed door. It stood like a monument to fear at the end of a narrow side passage, constructed of steel plates welded together with industrial precision. No windows, no handle, no visible means of entry except for a small access panel near the bottom that had been painted over so many times it was nearly flush with the surrounding metal. Above the door, stenciled in block letters that had faded but remained legible, were the words, "A taut-eyed personnel only, Thornfield Mining Company." "This is it," Marcus said, consulting his map one final time. According to the blueprints, this passage was originally designed as an emergency escape route. After the incident, the mining company sealed it and declared the entire section structurally unsound. Jimmy approached the door cautiously, as if it might bite him. "What do you think they were trying to keep in? Or keep out?" Marcus replied, though he immediately regretted the words. There was no need to fuel Jimmy's already obvious anxiety with speculation. The access panel, when Marcus pried it open with a crowbar from his kit, revealed a maze of corroded wiring and what appeared to be some kind of monitoring equipment. A small gauge, its face cracked and needle frozen at 0, bore the label Atmospheric Pressure Differential. Below it, a red warning light that must have once flashed urgently now sat dark and dead. "They were monitoring the air pressure behind this door," Marcus observed. "That's unusual for a sealed mine shaft. Why would they care about air pressure if the tunnel was just structurally unsound?" Marcus didn't have an answer for that question, and it bothered him more than he cared to admit. As they stood before the sealed barrier, studying its construction and trying to understand its purpose, neither man noticed the fresh scratches in the metal near the bottom of the door. Scratches that looked suspiciously like fingernails dragged across steel. Scratches that definitely hadn't been there 50 years ago. From somewhere beyond the sealed door came a sound so faint it might have been imagination, a rhythmic tapping like someone knocking from the other side. But that was impossible. The space beyond had been sealed for half a century. Nothing could have survived in there for 50 years. Nothing human, anyway. Marcus pulled out his satellite phone to call Pinnacle Industries. "This is Thorne," he said when the connection went through. "We have located the sealed section at Copper Ridge. I'm going to need specialized equipment to breach that door safely. Industrial cutting torches, atmospheric monitoring gear, and..." He paused, looking at the ominous barrier before him. "Better send a few extra men. I have a feeling we are going to need them." As he ended the call, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Not by Jimmy, who was busy photographing the door from every angle, but by something else. Something that had been waiting in the darkness for 50 years, listening for the sound of footsteps in the tunnels above. The temperature continued to drop as they prepared to return to the surface, and by the time they reached the mine entrance, both men's breath was visible in great white clouds. As they emerged into the afternoon sunlight, Marcus felt as though he was escaping from more than just the physical confines of the underground tunnels. Behind them, Copper Ridge Mine settled back into its eternal silence, keeping its secrets buried in the darkness below. But secrets, Marcus was beginning to understand, had a way of refusing to stay buried forever. That night in his motel room in Dustfall, Marcus spread out copies of the original incident reports and witness statements from November. The official story was straightforward enough. 5 miners working the night shift. Vernon Kellerman, Ray Hutchins, Curtis Donovan, Floyd Martinez, and Dwight Patterson had entered the mine at 11 p.m. for routine excavation work in the lower tunnels. They never came out. The morning shift foreman found their equipment abandoned at the 600-foot level, along with their lunch pails, carbide lamps, and work clothes, folded neatly beside the tunnel entrance. No bodies were ever recovered. No trace of violence was discovered. The men had simply vanished as if they had never existed at all. But the witness statements told a different story. Margaret Kellerman, Vernon's wife, reported that her husband had seemed unusually agitated in the days leading up to his disappearance. He spoke of strange sounds in the deep tunnels, of drafts of air that carried impossible smells, of shadows that moved independently of any light source. The other wives corroborated similar behavior from their husbands, men who had worked the mines for decades, suddenly becoming nervous about descending into the depths they knew better than their own homes. More disturbing still was the statement from Dale Hutchins, the mine foreman and Ray's older brother. On November 14th, the day before the disappearance, Dale had descended into the lower tunnels to inspect a new excavation site. He reported finding evidence of unauthorized digging, a passage that extended beyond the approved mining boundaries into areas that, according to geological surveys, should have been solid granite. The tunnel went deeper than it should have. Dale's statement read, "Much deeper, and there was something wrong with the air down there. It smelled like something had died and been left to rot. But there was something else too, something sweet, almost floral. It made my head spin and my vision blur. I ordered the area sealed immediately, but the night shift insisted they could handle whatever was down there. 5 good men thought they could handle it. 5 good men who were never seen again." Marcus closed the file and rubbed his tired eyes. Outside his window, the lights of Dustfall twinkled like earthbound stars, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled at the moon. But his attention was focused on the darkness beyond the town's borders, where Copper Ridge Mine waited in silent patience for his return. Tomorrow, the specialized equipment would arrive. Tomorrow they would breach the sealed door and discover what had been hidden behind steel and silence for 50 years. Tomorrow, they would finally learn the truth about what happened to Vernon Kellerman, Ray Hutchins, Curtis Donovan, Floyd Martinez, and Dwight Patterson. But as Marcus drifted off to sleep, he couldn't escape the feeling that some truths were better left buried in the darkness where they belonged. and somewhere in his dreams he heard the sound of distant voices calling out from the depths of the earth, pleading for help that would never come. The truth was waiting behind that sealed door, patient and hungry after 5 decades of solitude. And soon, very soon, it would be free. The industrial cutting equipment arrived at dawn, transported in 3 unmarked trucks that carved deep ruts in the desert sand as they approached Copper Ridge Mine. Marcus watched from the entrance as 6 men in Pinnacle Industries uniforms unloaded acetylene torches, atmospheric monitoring devices, and enough emergency oxygen to supply a small expedition. Leading the crew was Frank Dutton, a veteran mine safety inspector, whose weathered face told the story of 30 years spent in the bowels of the earth. "Hell of a thing, Doc," Dutton said as he surveyed the mine entrance. "In all my years, I have never seen a company seal off a section this thoroughly. Usually when there's a cave-in, they mark it dangerous and move on. This," he gestured toward the trucks full of equipment, "this is what you do when you are trying to keep something contained." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Any theories on what they might have been containing?" Dutton spat into the dust and adjusted his hard hat. "In my experience, when mining companies get spooked enough to weld steel doors shut, it's because they found something that wasn't supposed to be there. Could be gas pockets, could be unstable geology, could be..." He trailed off, leaving the sentence hanging like smoke in the desert wind.
"Could be what, Frank?"
"Could be they dug where they shouldn't have dug and found something that was better left alone." By 10 a.m. the entire crew had descended into the mine, their progress marked by the steady hum of generators and the harsh white glare of industrial lighting. The temporary power system transformed the ancient tunnels into something resembling a modern operation, but somehow the brightness only made the shadows seem deeper and more menacing. At the 600-foot level, Dutton's team had established what they called a staging area, a collection of equipment and monitoring devices arranged in a semicircle before the sealed door. Atmospheric sensors read normal levels of oxygen, carbon dioxide, and methane, but there was something about the readings that troubled Marcus. The air pressure differential gauge that he'd found in the access panel the day before was now reading positive pressure, meaning something behind the door was pushing air outward. "That's impossible," muttered Rodriguez, Dutton's lead technician, as he double-checked the readings. "Been sealed for 50 years. There's no way to generate positive pressure without an active source." Jimmy, who had been unusually quiet since their return to the mine, was standing near the door with his ear pressed against the metal. "Doc," he called softly, "you need to hear this." Marcus approached cautiously. At first he heard nothing but the ambient sounds of the crew's equipment. Then, as he pressed his ear to the cold steel, he detected it, a rhythmic sound almost like breathing, but deeper and more resonant. It seemed to come in waves, rising and falling with the patience of something that had learned to wait. "Could be air circulation," he said, though he didn't believe it himself. "Temperature differential creating natural convection currents." Dutton overheard and shook his head. "No natural process makes a sound that regular. That's..." He paused, listening himself. "That's something alive." The cutting operation began at noon. Rodriguez had rigged an acetylene torch, capable of slicing through 6 inches of steel, while 2 other technicians operated vacuum systems designed to clear smoke and debris. Marcus positioned himself at the monitoring station, watching atmospheric readings that should have remained stable but instead fluctuated wildly as the torch bit into the metal. The first breach came after 20 minutes of cutting, a hole roughly the size of a dinner plate near the top of the door. Immediately a rush of air escaped from behind the barrier, carrying with it a smell that made every man in the tunnel step backward instinctively. It was the odor Marcus had detected the day before, but concentrated now to an almost overwhelming degree. Sweet and floral, but underneath those notes lurked something else. Something that spoke of decay and endings. "Jesus Christ," whispered one of the younger technicians. "What the hell is that smell?" But more disturbing than the odor was the sound that followed. From beyond the breach came what could only be described as a sigh, long satisfied and unmistakably conscious. as if something had been holding its breath for 50 years and was finally able to exhale. Rodriguez shut off the torch and stepped back from the door. "I don't like this, Frank. I don't like this at all." Dutton was studying the atmospheric readings, his face pale in the harsh lighting. "Oxygen levels are spiking," he reported. "Carbon dioxide is dropping. It's like the air behind that door is purer than what we are breathing out here." "That's impossible," Marcus said. "After 50 years of containment, the atmosphere should be stale, depleted. There's no way." His words were cut off by a new sound from behind the door. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and moving closer to the breach. Everyone in the tunnel froze, tools forgotten, as the unmistakable sound of someone walking approached from the sealed chamber beyond. "There's someone in there," Jimmy whispered. "Someone's alive in there." But that was impossible. The space had been sealed for 50 years. No one could survive that long without food, water, or fresh air. No one human, anyway. The footsteps stopped directly behind the breach. In the silence that followed, Marcus could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Then, from the darkness beyond the hole came a voice. "Hello?" The word was spoken clearly, in a tone that conveyed both hope and terrible weariness. "Is someone there? We have been waiting so long." Rodriguez dropped his torch with a clatter that echoed through the tunnel like a gunshot. That's not possible." But Dutton was already moving toward the breach, his face set with grim determination. "This is Frank Dutton with Pinnacle Industries," he called toward the hole. "Can you identify yourself?" The response came immediately, spoken in the same weary but hopeful tone. "Vernon Kellerman, Thornfield Mining Company, employee number 4847. Thank God you found us. We thought everyone had forgotten about us." Marcus felt the world tilt around him. Vernon Kellerman had been one of the 5 miners who vanished in 1962. That was 50 years ago. The man speaking to them would have to be nearly 90 years old, assuming he had somehow survived 5 decades of imprisonment. "Vernon," Dutton called, his voice steady despite the impossibility of the situation. "This is going to sound strange, but what year do you think it is?" A pause. "Then it's 1962, isn't it? November 16th. We have been down here since yesterday morning when the passage opened up. Ray found something back there, something that shouldn't exist. We tried to seal it off, but it was too late. The others went deeper. I have been waiting by the door, hoping someone would come." Marcus exchanged glances with Dutton. Either they were dealing with someone suffering from severe psychological trauma, or something far more disturbing was occurring behind that steel barrier. "Vernon," Marcus called, "I need you to step back from the door. We are going to cut it open, but it's going to take some time." "Thank you," came the reply. "Thank you for not leaving us here." The cutting resumed, but the work proceeded more slowly now. Every man in the tunnel was acutely aware that they were not just breaching a sealed chamber, but potentially releasing something that had been contained for 5 decades. The atmospheric readings continued to fluctuate wildly, and twice Rodriguez had to stop work when the oxygen levels spiked to dangerous levels. As the hole grew larger, more details emerged from the chamber beyond. The space appeared to be much larger than the blueprints indicated. Their lights penetrated perhaps 40 feet before being absorbed by darkness. The walls were smooth granite, but they seemed to curve in ways that defied the geometric precision of mining operations. And there were sounds, not just the voice of Vernon Kellerman, but other noises that suggested movement in the depths of the chamber. "How big is that space?" Jimmy asked, peering through the expanding breach. "According to the original survey," Marcus replied, consulting his maps, "it should be a simple maintenance tunnel, maybe 8 feet wide and 30 feet deep. But this," he gestured toward the hole, "this looks like a natural cavern." By 3 p.m., the opening was large enough for a man to pass through. Dutton rigged emergency lighting and extended it into the chamber, revealing a space that bore no resemblance to anything in the mining company's blueprints. The chamber was indeed a natural cavern, its walls adorned with formations that sparkled in the artificial light like crystalline growths. The ceiling disappeared into darkness far overhead, and at the far end of the visible space, a passage led deeper into the mountain. But there was no sign of Vernon Kellerman or anyone else. "Vernon," Dutton called. "Where are you?" The response came from deeper in the cavern, beyond the reach of their lights. "Back here. The others are back here too. They have been sleeping, but I think they are starting to wake up." Against every protocol in the mine safety handbook, Dutton prepared to enter the chamber. He strapped on additional oxygen tanks, activated emergency transponders, and rigged a safety line that would allow the crew to extract him if necessary. "Frank, this is insane," Rodriguez protested. "We don't know what's in there. We don't know if it's safe." "There are people in there," Dutton replied grimly. "People who have been trapped for 50 years. I'm not leaving them." Marcus found himself volunteering to accompany Dutton, despite every rational instinct screaming at him to flee. Perhaps it was professional curiosity, or perhaps it was the growing certainty that they had stumbled upon something far more significant than a simple mining accident. The chamber beyond the door was even more imposing from the inside. The crystalline formations that adorned the walls pulsed with a faint, phosphorescent glow that seemed to intensify as they moved deeper into the space. The air was indeed purer than anything they had been breathing in the tunnels, so pure it was almost intoxicating. "This place," Marcus whispered, "it's beautiful." Dutton was more practical. "It's also not on any geological survey. How do you miss a cavern this size during mineral exploration?" They found Vernon Kellerman 30 feet from the entrance, standing beside what appeared to be a natural spring that bubbled up from the cavern floor. He was exactly as he would have appeared in 1962. A man in his 30s wearing the standard mining gear of the era, looking as though he had just finished a shift. There was no sign of aging, no indication that 5 decades had passed since he last saw sunlight. "Thank God," Vernon said as they approached. "I knew someone would come eventually. The company wouldn't just abandon us." Marcus studied the man carefully. Either Vernon Kellerman was the best preserved 70-year-old in human history, or something was very wrong with their understanding of what had happened in this place. "Vernon," Marcus said carefully, "what's the last thing you remember before you ended up down here?" "Ray found the passage," Vernon replied without hesitation. "We were working the 600-foot level, standard excavation, when Ray's pick broke through into this chamber. The air that came out," he shuddered. "It was like nothing we'd ever smelled. Sweet, but underneath it was something else. Something that made us dizzy just breathing it." "What happened to the others?" Vernon pointed toward the passage at the far end of the chamber. "They went deeper, said they could hear something calling to them from down there. I tried to stop them, but..." He shrugged helplessly. "Ray was convinced we'd found something valuable, something the company would pay handsomely for." Dutton was examining the spring, noting how the water seemed to glow with the same phosphorescent light as the crystal formations. "This water, have you been drinking it?" "Had to," Vernon replied. "It's all there is down here. Tastes better than anything I have ever had, though. Makes you feel renewed." Marcus felt pieces of an impossible puzzle beginning to arrange themselves in his mind. The preserved appearance of Vernon Kellerman, the pure atmosphere, the glowing water. It was as if this chamber existed outside the normal flow of time and decay. "Vernon," he said slowly, "I need to tell you something, and it's going to be difficult to understand. The year isn't 1962, it's 20... Vernon stared at him for a long moment, then laughed, a sound that echoed strangely in the crystalline chamber. "That's impossible. I have only been here since yesterday." But even as he spoke, uncertainty crept into his voice. He looked around the chamber as if seeing it for the first time, noting details that seemed to surprise him. The crystal formations appeared more extensive than he remembered. The water from the spring flowed in patterns that seemed to shift when observed directly. 50 years, he whispered. How is that possible? Before Marcus could answer, a new sound echoed from the depths of the chamber, a sound like singing but in harmonies that human voices could never achieve. It was beautiful and terrible, compelling and repulsive, and it seemed to come from the passage where Vernon claimed the other miners had disappeared. They are calling, Vernon said, his eyes fixed on the dark passage. They have been calling for so long. Maybe it's time to answer. And despite every rational thought in his head, Marcus found himself taking a step toward the sound. The singing was unlike anything he had ever heard, touching something deep in his mind that responded with primitive recognition. This was the sound of the earth itself, the voice of stone and mineral and time made audible. Behind them, through the breach in the sealed door, they could hear Rodriguez shouting warnings and demands for immediate return. But the words seemed to come from very far away, filtered through layers of time and possibility that made them increasingly irrelevant. The singing grew stronger, more insistent, and somewhere in its alien harmonies, Marcus thought he could distinguish individual voices. Ray Hutchins, Curtis Donovan, Floyd Martinez and Dwight Patterson, the four missing miners, calling to their friend Vernon, and to anyone else who might be willing to join them in whatever they had discovered in the deepest chambers of Copper Ridge Mine. Don't listen to it, Dutton warned, grabbing Marcus by the shoulder. Whatever that is, it's not human, and it's not friendly. But Vernon was already walking toward the passage, his movements dreamlike and inevitable. They are my friends, he said simply. They have been waiting for me. I can't leave them down there alone. As Vernon disappeared into the darkness, the singing reached a crescendo that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mountain. The crystal formations pulsed with increasing intensity, and the water from the spring began to bubble more vigorously, as if responding to some underground disturbance. And then, from the depths of the passage, came another sound, the sound of many feet walking in unison, moving steadily toward the chamber where Marcus and Dutton stood, frozen in terror and fascination. The missing miners were coming home. The footsteps grew louder, more distinct, until Marcus could count at least 4 separate sets of boots moving in perfect synchronization across stone. The sound echoed from the passage with mechanical precision, as if the walkers had forgotten the natural irregularities of human movement and learned instead to march with the relentless rhythm of mining equipment. We need to get out of here, Dutton whispered, his voice barely audible above the approaching footfalls. Now. But Marcus found himself rooted to the spot, mesmerized by the interplay of light and shadow at the mouth of the passage. The phosphorescent crystals had begun to pulse in time with the footsteps, creating a strobe effect that made the chamber walls appear to breathe. The spring water bubbled more frantically, and somewhere in its agitated surface, Marcus thought he could see faces looking back at him, faces he recognized from the 1962 company photographs. The singing had evolved into something more complex, layering harmonies upon harmonies until it resembled a choir of inhuman voices celebrating some ancient ritual. And underneath it all, barely perceptible but undeniably present, was the sound of Vernon Kellerman laughing with joy at his reunion with his long-lost colleagues. The first figure emerged from the passage like a shadow given substance. Ray Hutchins, the shift foreman who had supposedly led the expedition into the depths, stepped into the crystal-lit chamber with movements that were both familiar and deeply wrong. He walked with the measured gait of a man who had learned patience over decades, but his eyes reflected light like those of a nocturnal predator. Marcus, Ray said, and somehow he knew Marcus's name despite their never having met. Dr. Marcus Thorne, Geological Surveyor for Pinnacle Industries. We have been expecting you. Behind Ray came the others, Curtis Donovan, Floyd Martinez, and Dwight Patterson, each moving with the same predatory grace, each wearing the mining clothes they had donned 50 years ago, as if they had just finished their shift. But there were changes, subtle alterations that became more apparent as they moved into the full illumination of the emergency lighting. Their skin had taken on a pale, translucent quality that seemed to glow from within. Their eyes, once human brown and blue and green, now reflected the phosphorescent light of the crystals with an intensity that spoke of fundamental transformation. And when they smiled, which they did frequently and in perfect unison, their teeth appeared sharper than Marcus remembered human teeth should be. "You look surprised," Floyd Martinez observed, his voice carrying undertones that resonated through the stone itself. "Didn't Vernon explain? We found something wonderful down here, Dr. Thorne. Something that changes everything." Dutton was backing toward the entrance, his safety line taut behind him. "Whatever you found," he said, his voice steady despite his obvious terror, "it's not natural. It's not right." Curtis Donovan laughed, a sound like wind through crystalline caves. "Natural? Right? Those are surface concepts, Mr. Dutton. Down here we have learned to think in geological time. We have learned to see with the eyes of the mountain itself." Vernon emerged from the passage last, and the transformation in him was the most shocking of all. Where minutes before he had appeared unchanged from his 1962 self, now he bore the same pale luminescence as his colleagues. But more disturbing was the expression of rapturous peace on his face, as if he had finally found something he had been searching for his entire life. "They showed me," Vernon said, addressing Marcus directly. "They showed me what we really found that night. It wasn't just a cavern. It was a doorway, a passage to something that exists beneath the normal world, beneath the surface reality that traps everyone else in cycles of aging and death and meaningless struggle." Marcus forced himself to speak through the mounting terror. "What did you find?" The 5 miners exchanged glances, communicating in a way that transcended spoken language. Then Ray stepped forward, his transformed features serious and almost compassionate. 50 years ago, Ray began. "We were excavating the lower tunnels when my pick broke through into this chamber. But this was just the antechamber, Dr. Thorne. Beyond the passage lies something far more significant, a geological formation that shouldn't exist, a structure that predates human civilization by millions of years." "We followed the passage deeper," Curtis continued seamlessly, as if they were components of a single consciousness. "Down through chambers carved by forces that weren't erosion or volcanic activity, down to where the Earth keeps its most ancient secrets." Floyd took up the narrative thread. "We found the heart chamber, a vast space at the center of the mountain, where the rock itself pulses with life. The walls are covered with formations that aren't quite mineral and aren't quite organic. They sing, Dr. Thorne. They sing with the voice of deep time, with harmonies that existed before the first human drew breath. And they are hungry," Dwight added with disturbing satisfaction. "So very hungry for contact with the surface world. They have been isolated for so long, trapped beneath layers of stone and silence. When we found them, they welcomed us like long-lost children." Vernon nodded enthusiastically. "They offered us a choice: return to the surface and grow old and die like every other human, or stay and become something more. Something permanent. Something that could serve as ambassadors between their realm and ours." Marcus felt his scientific rationality crumbling in the face of what he was hearing. "You have been down here for 50 years. 50 years without aging, without dying. How is that possible?" "Time moves differently in the heart chamber," Ray explained. "What you measure in decades, we experience as moments. The formations, the entities that inhabit them, exist in a state beyond temporal limitation. By accepting their gift, we have joined them in that existence." Dutton had reached the breach in the sealed door and was shouting instructions to the crew on the other side. But his words seemed to bounce off an invisible barrier, failing to carry beyond the chamber's boundaries. The miners watched his efforts with amusement, as if observing a child's attempt to break a toy. "The chamber has been sealed for a reason, Mr. Dutton," Floyd said kindly. "Not to keep us in, but to keep others out until the proper time. Until the right people arrived with the tools and knowledge necessary to complete what we began." "Complete what?" Marcus demanded. The 5 miners smiled in unison. And in that moment, Marcus understood that whatever humanity they had once possessed had been replaced by something else entirely. They were no longer the working-class heroes who had disappeared in 1962, but had become servants of forces that existed beyond human comprehension. The opening, Vernon said simply. The mining company sealed this entrance, but there are others. Passages that connect to the heart chamber from different points throughout the mountain range, with modern equipment, with the kind of industrial resources that Pinnacle Industries commands. Those passages can be enlarged, made accessible. You want us to open more entrances, Marcus realized with growing horror. We want you to help our friends reach the surface, Ray corrected. They have been patient for so long, waiting in the depths while the upper world developed the technology necessary to facilitate their emergence. Mining equipment, transportation networks, communication systems, everything they need to establish themselves in your reality. Curtis stepped closer, his phosphorescent eyes fixed on Marcus with predatory intensity. You have already begun the process by breaching this seal. The atmosphere in the upper tunnels has changed, hasn't it? Became purer, more vital. That's their influence, their essence, seeping through the barrier between realms. Marcus remembered the atmospheric readings that had puzzled Rodriguez, the oxygen spikes, the pressure differentials, the sense that the air itself had become somehow more alive. He had attributed it to natural phenomena, but now he understood that nothing about Copper Ridge Mine had ever been natural. The men on your crew, Floyd continued, they are already beginning to feel the effects, the dizziness, the disorientation, the strange dreams that will come tonight. It's the first stage of transformation, the moment when human consciousness begins to expand beyond its normal limitations. Through the breach, Marcus could hear Rodriguez calling out to Dutton, but the technician's voice sounded increasingly distant and confused. The other crew members were arguing about readings that made no sense, about equipment malfunctions that followed no logical pattern. Jimmy, Marcus whispered, suddenly remembering his assistant. What have you done to Jimmy? Vernon's expression softened with what might have been genuine concern. Your assistant is particularly sensitive to their influence. He heard them calling yesterday, didn't he? Felt drawn to the sealed areas of the mine. By now, the transformation process has advanced considerably. Marcus turned toward the breach, shouting Jimmy's name, but received no response. The sounds from the tunnel beyond had grown muffled and indistinct, as if the chamber was gradually sealing itself off from the outside world. He's safe, Ray assured him. They all are. But safety in this context means something different than what you might expect. It means becoming part of something larger, something that transcends the brief and painful existence of surface humanity. Dutton had given up his attempts to communicate with the crew and was now examining the breach itself. The opening that had been cut through the steel door was beginning to change, its edges growing smoother and more organic. The metal was flowing like liquid, reforming itself into patterns that resembled the crystalline formations on the chamber walls. The barrier is re-establishing itself, Dwight observed with satisfaction. Soon this chamber will be isolated once again, at least temporarily. But the process has been initiated. The connections have been made. What happens next cannot be stopped. Marcus understood then that they had walked into a trap that had been 50 years in the making. The sealed chamber hadn't been a containment measure. It had been a chrysalis, a place of transformation where human consciousness could be prepared for integration with something far older and more alien than anything that belonged on the surface world. You are not the first, Curtis said, reading the realization in Marcus's expression. Other mining operations have encountered similar formations. Other crews have been selected for transformation. We are part of a network now, Dr. Thorne, a distributed consciousness that spans the underground regions of multiple continents. The Earth itself is waking up, Floyd added with religious fervor. The deep layers are stirring after eons of dormancy. The formations we serve are just one node in a vast underground intelligence that's finally ready to reclaim the surface world. Vernon moved closer to Marcus, his transformed features radiating an alien kindness. You can fight it, but resistance only makes the process more painful. We fought too at first, but eventually we understood the gift we were being offered. Immortality, Dr. Thorne, perspective that spans geological ages, unity with forces that shaped this planet long before humanity crawled out of the primordial seas. The singing had grown stronger, more complex, and Marcus realized that the voices were not coming from the miners themselves, but from something much deeper in the mountain. The heart chamber that Ray had described was calling out through its human converts, using their transformed vocal cords to produce harmonies that no earthly creature could achieve. "Listen to them," Ray whispered, his eyes closed in ecstatic concentration. "Can you hear what they are saying? They are singing the history of the earth itself, the formation of mountains, the cooling of magma, the slow dance of tectonic plates across millions of years. They are singing the future too, Dr. Thorne. The future where surface and depth are finally united." Marcus felt his rational mind beginning to fracture under the assault of impossible realities. The singing was indeed beautiful, more beautiful than anything he had ever experienced. And somewhere in its alien melodies he could detect patterns that spoke to a part of his consciousness that predated language and civilization. But Frank Dutton's voice cut through the euphoric haze like a knife through silk. "Doctor, the breach is closing. We need to move now." Marcus turned to see that the opening in the steel door had indeed contracted to half its original size. The metal continued to flow and reshape itself, guided by forces that transformed solid matter as easily as sculpting clay. In minutes, perhaps less, they would be trapped in the chamber with the transformed miners and whatever entities controlled them. "Don't fight it," Vernon pleaded, as Marcus moved toward the closing breach. "The surface world is dying, Dr. Thorne. Pollution, wars, climate change, humanity has poisoned the very air and water that sustains life. Down here, in the deep places, there's still purity. There's still hope for something better." Marcus reached the breach just as it contracted to a size barely large enough for a human body. Dutton was on the other side, reaching through the gap with desperate urgency. But as Marcus prepared to escape, he heard something that made him pause. Jimmy's voice, coming from deeper in the tunnel system, raised in harmony with the otherworldly singing. His assistant had already joined the chorus, his human voice transformed into something that could match the alien frequencies of the deep earth entities. "He's happy," Floyd said from behind Marcus. "Happier than he's ever been in his surface existence. The loneliness is gone, Dr. Thorne. The fear, the uncertainty, the constant struggle against time and mortality, all gone. He's part of something infinite now." Marcus hesitated at the threshold between worlds, torn between the rational obligation to escape and the growing certainty that escape might not be possible. The atmospheric changes that had begun with the breach of the sealed door were accelerating throughout the mind system. Every breath of the transformed air brought new visions, new understanding of perspectives that spanned geological time. But it was Dutton's hand, solid and human and desperate, that pulled him through the contracting breach and back into the realm of ordinary reality. The steel door sealed itself behind them with a sound like a sigh, leaving only smooth metal where the opening had been. The tunnel beyond was chaos. Rodriguez and two other technicians were unconscious, overcome by atmospheric changes that had transformed the air itself into something that human lungs could barely process. The remaining crew members moved like sleepwalkers, their eyes reflecting the same phosphorescent glow that Marcus had seen in the transformed miners. And somewhere in the depths of the mine, Jimmy Restrepo continued singing in harmony with forces that existed beyond the boundaries of human experience, his voice adding a new thread to the alien tapestry of sound that emanated from the heart chamber far below. "We have to get out of here," Dutton gasped, his face pale from oxygen deprivation. "Whatever's happening down there, it's spreading through the entire mine system." But as they struggled to evacuate the unconscious crew members, Marcus couldn't escape the feeling that they were already too late. The process that had begun 50 years ago with 5 miners and a broken pick had entered its final phase. The deep earth entities had tasted surface air for the first time in geological ages, and they had found it good. The transformation of Copper Ridge Mine was complete. Now it was time for the transformation of everything else. The ascent from Copper Ridge Mine became a nightmare of failing equipment and disorienting atmospheric pressure. Rodriguez regained consciousness halfway to the surface, but his eyes held the same phosphorescent glow that Marcus had seen in the transformed miners. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate through the rock itself. "They are coming," Rodriguez whispered as Dutton and Marcus carried him toward the entrance. "They are coming for all of us now. The deep places are opening everywhere." Marcus tried to focus on the immediate crisis, evacuating the crew, sealing the mine, calling for emergency containment. But Rodriguez's words echoed with disturbing authenticity. The young technician had been exposed to the transformed atmosphere for less than an hour, yet he spoke with the certainty of someone who had gained access to information spanning geological ages. They reached the surface just as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the Nevada desert in shades of copper and gold that reminded Marcus too vividly of the phosphorescent glow in the chamber below. The remaining crew members, those still capable of coherent thought, loaded their unconscious colleagues into the transport trucks with mechanical efficiency, their faces bearing expressions of profound confusion. "What the hell happened down there?" demanded Peterson, the only crew member who seemed completely unaffected by the atmospheric changes. "One minute we are cutting through steel. The next minute half the crew is unconscious and the other half is talking about singing rocks." Dutton was already on his satellite phone, placing urgent calls to Pinnacle Industries headquarters. But his conversations were brief and increasingly frustrated, punctuated by long silences that suggested the people on the other end were having difficulty accepting his reports. "They don't believe us," Dutton said after ending his fourth call. "Corporate thinks we are suffering from nitrogen narcosis or carbon monoxide poisoning. They are sending a medical team, but they won't authorize full containment protocol." Marcus looked back at the mine entrance, where heat waves rising from the desert floor created optical illusions that made the opening appear to pulse with organic life. Somewhere far below, the heart chamber continued its ancient song, and with each passing hour, that song grew stronger and more compelling. "How long," Marcus asked Rodriguez, "before the transformation becomes irreversible?" Rodriguez smiled with disturbing serenity. "Irreversible is a surface concept, Dr. Thorne. What we are experiencing isn't destruction, it's evolution. The entities below don't want to destroy humanity. They want to elevate it, to grant it the perspective that comes from thinking in geological time. And Jimmy understands now. He's seen the truth that lies beneath the superficial reality of the surface world. Soon you will see it too. Soon everyone will see it." As evening approached, Marcus found himself studying the geological survey maps of the entire Copper Ridge region. With growing alarm, the mountain range contained dozens of abandoned mining operations, dating back to the silver rushes of the each mine had been closed for different reasons: cave-ins, ore depletion, economic factors. But now Marcus wondered if some of those closures might have had more sinister causes. His satellite phone rang as the last light faded from the western sky. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number with a Washington, D.C. area code. "Dr. Thorne?" The voice was crisp, professional, and carried the unmistakable authority of federal government. "This is Director Angela Morse, Department of Geological Security. I understand you have encountered some unusual phenomena at the Copper Ridge site." Marcus had never heard of the Department of Geological Security, but the woman's tone suggested she was intimately familiar with the situation at the mine. "Director Morse, we have discovered evidence of—" "Dr. Thorne," she interrupted, "please limit your discussion to confirmed facts. I'm en route to your location with a specialized response team. Until we arrive, I need you to maintain a 2-mile perimeter around the mine entrance and ensure that no personnel enter the underground sections. Director, there are crew members still down there. My assistant Jimmy Restrepo and possibly others. Dr. Thorne, her voice carried a weight that silenced his protests. The individuals you are concerned about are no longer your responsibility. They have become part of something that requires specialized handling. The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at his phone in disbelief. The existence of a Department of Geological Security suggested that the government was already aware of the entities beneath Copper Ridge Mine, which meant this wasn't an isolated incident. Rodriguez had been listening to the conversation with obvious amusement. They have been monitoring sites like this for decades, he said. Copper Ridge is just one node in a much larger network. The Deep Earth intelligence has been stirring for years, making contact through mining operations, oil drilling, geothermal projects, anywhere humans dig deep enough to breach the barriers between surface and depth. How do you know this? Because I can feel them now, Dr. Thorne. Their consciousness touches mine whenever I concentrate. They have been patient, so patient, waiting for the right moment when surface technology would be advanced enough to facilitate their emergence. That moment is now. As if to punctuate Rodriguez's words, a low rumble emanated from deep within the mountain. The sound wasn't geological. It was too regular, too purposeful, like the heartbeat of something impossibly vast. Around the mine entrance, the desert sand began to vibrate in concentric circles, and in the distance, similar vibrations could be felt from other points throughout the mountain range. Other sites are activating, Rodriguez observed with satisfaction. The network is coming online. Dutton emerged from one of the trucks, his face grim with exhaustion and fear. 3 more crew members are showing signs of transformation. Their body temperatures have dropped 10 degrees, but they claim to feel perfectly warm, and they are all humming the same tune. Something that sounds like it's being transmitted directly into their minds. Marcus watched the lights of an approaching convoy appear on the desert highway, unmarked black vehicles moving with military precision toward their location. Director Morse's specialized response team was arriving ahead of schedule, which suggested they had been positioned nearby in anticipation of this exact scenario. They know, Rodriguez said, following Marcus's gaze. They have known for years that this day would come. The question is whether they will try to fight it or accept the inevitable. The convoy consisted of 6 vehicles, 4 armored trucks, a mobile command center, and a specialized containment unit that looked more like a prison transport than scientific equipment. The teams that emerged were armed with weapons Marcus didn't recognize, devices that hummed with electromagnetic energy and cast strange shadows in the desert darkness. Director Morse proved to be a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. She approached Marcus with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to managing catastrophic situations. Dr. Thorne, I'm sorry we couldn't brief you before your survey, but sites like Copper Ridge require careful monitoring to prevent premature activation. Your breach of the sealed chamber has accelerated the timeline considerably. Accelerated what timeline? The emergence protocol. The entities you have encountered have been dormant for millions of years, trapped beneath geological barriers that formed during the last major tectonic shift. Human mining activities over the past century have been gradually weakening those barriers, and sites like Copper Ridge represent critical breach points. Marcus gestured toward the mine entrance, where the rhythmic pulsing was becoming more pronounced. So you knew this would happen? We knew it was inevitable. The question was whether we could manage the process or whether it would proceed beyond our control. Your survey was supposed to provide intelligence on the site's current status, not trigger full activation. Rodriguez laughed from his position near the trucks. Control? You think you can control geological forces that predate human civilization? Director Morse, you are about to discover just how insignificant surface authority becomes when dealing with the deep earth intelligence. Morse's team was already deploying equipment around the mine entrance, devices that generated containment fields designed to prevent the spread of atmospheric contamination. But the fields flickered and failed repeatedly, as if the energy emanating from below was interfering with their operation. "Ma'am," called one of the technicians, "we are reading massive electromagnetic disturbances from at least 12 other sites throughout the region. Whatever's happening here is definitely not isolated." Morse studied her handheld device, her expression growing increasingly grave. "Regional activation." Just as the models predicted. She looked up at Marcus. "Dr. Thorne, I need you to understand something. The entities beneath Copper Ridge aren't malevolent in any way that human minds can comprehend. They are simply operating on a timescale that makes individual human lives irrelevant. To them, the transformation of your assistant and crew members isn't tragedy. It's recruitment. Recruitment for what? Preparation for surface integration. They need human consciousness to serve as interpreters, to help them understand and navigate the complexities of modern civilization. Your people aren't dead, Dr. Thorne. They have been elevated to serve as ambassadors between two forms of intelligence that evolved along completely different timelines. As if summoned by her words, figures began emerging from the mine entrance. Jimmy appeared first, moving with the fluid grace that Marcus had observed in the transformed miners. Behind him came the crew members who had been reported missing, their eyes reflecting the phosphorescent glow of the deep chambers. But these weren't the shambling zombies of surface horror stories. They moved with purpose and intelligence, carrying equipment that shouldn't have existed in the mine, crystalline devices that pulsed with the same rhythm as the mountain's heart. "Jimmy," Marcus called out, stepping forward despite Morse's warning gesture. His assistant turned toward him with an expression of profound compassion. "Dr. Thorne, you don't need to be afraid. What we have found down there, it's beautiful beyond anything the surface world can offer. They are not trying to destroy humanity. They want to help us transcend the limitations that keep us trapped in cycles of suffering and mortality." "The people you knew," Morse said quietly, "still exist within the transformed consciousness, but they are now part of something much larger. Their individual personalities have been preserved while being integrated into a collective intelligence that spans continents." Jimmy nodded enthusiastically. "We can feel each other's thoughts now, Dr. Thorne. All of us who have been touched by the deep places. Rodriguez, Vernon, the miners from 1962, crews from other sites. We are all connected, and through us, the ancient intelligence can finally understand what's been happening on the surface during their long dormancy." The transformed crew members had formed a semicircle around Morse's containment equipment, their crystalline devices interfacing with the government technology in ways that suggested immediate understanding of its function and purpose. The containment fields stabilized and then began operating in reverse, actively facilitating rather than preventing the flow of energy from the depths. "They are learning," Morse observed with scientific fascination overriding her obvious fear, "adapting our technology to serve their purposes. The integration process is proceeding faster than any of our models predicted." Marcus felt a strange sensation, as if something was probing the edges of his consciousness with gentle persistence. The transformed atmosphere that had leaked from the mine was beginning to affect him too, opening his mind to perspectives that spanned geological time. He could sense the vast patience of the entities below, their eons-long preparation for this moment of contact with surface civilization. "Don't fight it," Jimmy advised, noting Marcus's confusion. "The transition is much easier if you accept it voluntarily. They are offering us a gift, Dr. Thorne, the ability to think beyond the brief span of individual human existence." But Marcus resisted, clinging to his scientific rationality, even as it crumbled under the assault of impossible realities. "What do they want from us? What's the end goal of all this transformation?" The answer came not from Jimmy or Rodriguez, but from deep within the mountain itself. The rhythmic pulsing intensified, and in its resonance, Marcus could detect patterns that conveyed meaning directly to his consciousness without requiring the mediation of language. They wanted partnership. The deep Earth intelligence had spent millions of years in isolation, cut off from the dynamic changes occurring on the planet's surface. Human civilization, with its rapid technological development and global communication networks, offered them an opportunity to participate in the ongoing evolution of terrestrial life. The transformation wasn't conquest, it was recruitment. They needed human agents who could operate in surface conditions while maintaining connection to the deep intelligence. Through these transformed individuals, they could learn about modern technology, social structures, and scientific understanding, while offering in return perspectives that spanned geological ages. It's symbiosis, Rodriguez explained, somehow sensing Marcus's growing comprehension. They provide us with immortality and cosmic perspective. We provide them with contemporary knowledge and the ability to interact with surface civilization. Morse was coordinating with her headquarters via encrypted communications, but her conversations were becoming increasingly frantic. "Sir, we have confirmed activation at 18 sites across 6 states. The phenomenon is spreading faster than our containment protocols can." Her words were cut off as the crystalline devices carried by the transformed crew members began resonating in harmony with similar devices that were apparently emerging from other sites throughout the region. The network Rodriguez had described was indeed coming online, creating a communication grid that spanned hundreds of miles of underground territory. "The emergence phase is beginning," Jimmy announced with quiet satisfaction. "They have learned enough about surface conditions to begin the integration process. Within hours, similar activations will occur at deep sites around the world." Marcus understood then that they were witnessing not just a local incident, but the beginning of a global transformation. The deep Earth intelligence had been preparing for this moment for geological ages, and humanity's mining and drilling activities had finally provided the access points they needed. "How long," Marcus asked, "before the transformation becomes global?" "Time is a relative concept," Rodriguez replied. "From their perspective, it's already complete. From ours, it will seem to happen gradually over the coming months and years. But the outcome is inevitable. Humanity will either accept partnership with the deep intelligence or find itself displaced by those who do." As dawn approached over the Nevada desert, Marcus found himself faced with an impossible choice. He could resist the transformation and remain trapped in the limited perspective of individual human consciousness, or he could accept the gift being offered and join a collective intelligence that spanned continents and geological ages. The decision was made for him when Morse's containment equipment finally failed completely, releasing a cloud of transformed atmosphere that enveloped the entire site. The last thing Marcus remembered as an individual consciousness was the sound of Jimmy's voice, raised in harmony with thousands of other transformed humans around the world, welcoming him into a perspective vast enough to encompass the entire history and future of terrestrial life. When the Pinnacle Industries Board of Directors received Director Morse's final report 3 weeks later, it contained a single recommendation: all deep mining operations should be suspended indefinitely, and existing sites should be sealed using protocols that had been developed for containing far more dangerous materials than conventional ore. But by then, it was too late. The network was operational, the integration process was proceeding smoothly, and the deep Earth intelligence had finally achieved its goal of establishing contact with surface civilization. The miners who vanished from Copper Ridge in 1962 had become the first ambassadors in a partnership that would reshape both the depths and the surface of the planet they shared. And in the crystalline chambers far beneath the Nevada desert, their voices joined the eternal song of geological time, welcoming each new recruit to perspectives that transcended the brief span of individual human existence. The transformation of humanity had begun, and it would continue until the last surface dweller understood that they had never been alone on the planet they called home. 50 years after 5 men disappeared into the depths of Copper Ridge Mine, the sealed room had finally been opened. But what emerged was far more significant than the missing miners. It was the beginning of a new phase in the evolution of terrestrial consciousness, one that would make the distinction between surface and depth irrelevant for the species that had learned to think in geological time. The mystery was solved. The real mystery was just beginning.